Conclude il panel il collega Bert Gevers, segretario generale di Attica e Loyens Leuf, Bruxelles.
Thank you, Marco. I'll be short and brief because I think that everyone is longing for the coffee break. At least so am I. So I only make a few comments that actually confirm the sharp analysis that Daniel has made. And I'll confirm that on the basis of the current status of the recast of the European dual-use regulation. And the conclusion is, we don't know how to regulate it, and we are divided. I think that sums it up. If you look at the latest mandate that has been given by the European Council in the framework of the recast of the dual-use regulation, it's clear that we are divided, and we still have to see what will ultimately come out of this recast. But just to point out the important part of the Commission proposal in 2016, or at least the most debated part of the Commission proposal, was the human security approach, as we have been discussing here. So it's how shall we regulate, or how shall we include new cyber technologies in the framework of this legislation on dual use and export controls. And the point taken by the Commission was, well, we'll extend our definition. We'll extend the definition of dual-use items to include cyber surveillance technologies. We'll extend the catch-all provision that will make it possible for member states to impose license requirements on cyber technologies that are exported to sensitive countries where there is a risk that they will be abused and violate human rights. And third one is to include a unilateral controls. So that means that European Union in itself, without international agreement, as for example in the Wassenaar Agreement, will impose certain controls on certain types of technologies. They identify two at a time. EU Parliament was quite enthusiastic about this approach, embracing this human rights approach, and they agreed with the proposal early 2018 already, and it was waiting, let's say, for the EU Council's position on this, and it took, in good European tradition, it took a few years of thorough reflection and discussion to come up with this position, and let's say suddenly, perhaps almost unexpected, in the early this month, they came up with this position, and they say, okay, we can find a position to negotiate with the EU Parliament, and we embrace some of the simplifications and harmonization measures that were included in the proposal, but we do not want to take this step of human security approach, at least not in the recast, not by implementing it into the dual-use recast. So we say, okay, this category 10 of technologies or cyber technologies that we will include as unilateral controls, we don't want to have this. We'll delete reference to cyber technologies in the definition, and we'll delete the reference to it as well in the catch-all provision. So what is our position as EU Council, member states? So is, yes, it's up to the member states. We'll shift the responsibility back to the member states to impose national unilateral controls if they want so. We'll adhere to the strategy to bring this to the multilateral negotiation platforms that exist, the Wassenaar Agreement. It's up to, let's say, the world, or at least the members of Wassenaar, to negotiate on this and to come to a common position. Or if there are specific concerns with respect to certain sensitive destinations, like, for example, Iran or Venezuela very recently, it's up to the EU to take this into and to implement this in separate sanctions provision. So not to use, let's say, the dual-use export regulation as, let's say, the basis to deal with these emerging technology. That's the position of the European Council so far. It's now up to the EU Parliament and the EU Council to come up with some kind of compromise, if that's at all possible. I don't have any idea on this. The new EU Parliament still has to step in. We'll see what comes out of that. If there's no agreement whatsoever, well, I think that the recast of the dual-use regulation will take will not have it in very short notice. If there is a conclusion somehow, I believe that we can have some kind of, let's say, reduced, modified recast in short term. So, but that's the actual position so far. I think it confirms pretty well, let's say, the conclusions that Daniel has made, and it will leave the European companies in the position that Daniel also mentioned. It's no longer evident for a company to assume that if he's complying with the rules in his own country, that it's okay in the rest of the world. Well, it's common knowledge to many European countries that if it's okay in their country, they cannot be sure that it's okay in another European country, even though they're all part of the European Union. So that's still an evolution that has to be made, and we'll see what comes out of that. But I think for now, these basically summarize the comments that I had in mind, and I think, Mr. President, that we are longing for the coffee break. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.